Hello, I'm Andrew McConaughey from ICANN staff, and with me today is Rod Rasmussen from ICANN's Security, Stability, and Advisory Committee. Rod, hello.
Hello.
I understand that the SSAC has recently published an advisory on access to domain name registration data. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We just released SAC101, our advisory regarding access to domain registration data. This is an advisory surrounding the concepts of getting data for domain name registrations, commonly called WHOIS, in order to do a variety of purposes with it. That is fundamental to a lot of the work that ICANN does and domain registries and registrars support through their infrastructure. What prompted this work was over time we found that access to this data seems to have been degrading. And people, for a variety of legitimate purposes, were not able to get a hold of the data they needed. So we took a look at this, and we've actually been working on this for over a year, taking a look at past work that's been done on this, studies, et cetera, around access to this data, and did some of our own work to validate some of the things and understand some of the things that were going on out there, including some outreach to registries and registrars to understand what they were doing. And there were two main impacts on access to this registration data through either the WHOIS lookups that many people are familiar with on the web, or the automated kind of back-end thing, what we call port 43 access, which uses the WHOIS protocol itself. Those two areas are what, first of which is what prompted the study, is what's called rate limiting. And this is something that people do to limit the amount of access to data you get from a system over time. And or in a time period, et cetera. There's many ways of rate limiting. One of the primary purposes for rate limiting is to protect your assets, your networks, et cetera, from abuse. Could be DDoS, could be just you only have so much server capacity, et cetera, et cetera. And you want to protect your networks, which is a very legitimate use, and and SX quite supportive of that. Another reason to do it is to limit access to the data. And that has some legitimate use, but what we found is that a lot of people who had very much a legitimate use were getting throttled, as in other words, rate limited very low, and to what seemed to be an unreasonable level. And studies had shown this, and we verified that through some of our work. So that's kind of what prompted the work. What also was going on in the meantime while we're doing this work is all the emphasis and work towards complying with GDPR. And GDPR then requires, at least as we've come to learn about it in the ICANN world, has required the ability to restrict access to personal data, and which is a form of limiting access to the data. So that fit in very nicely with the work we were already getting ready to publish around rate limiting. So we've added in this, looking at how GDPR and the temp spec, et cetera, has affected access to that data for people that have had uses for it, what that means, and talk towards policies around that affect the people who are helping protect the internet. Those would be law enforcement, security practitioners, people who access that data for investigations, for communications when there's attacks, for correlations of events to try and predict and protect networks from attacks and the like. SSAC has published this before, and we reiterated the fact that we believe that those are legitimate purposes that need to be taken account of as we go forward in the new world of GDPR and other data protection schemes. Of course, applicable with the law and staying within the law, the applicable local laws, et cetera. So we felt that these things needed to be brought forward so that the community was aware of the things that were going on. And then we provided some recommendations around how to address that, mainly from reiterating some advice or some already decided policy. For example, thick WHOIS, adoption of RDAP, all these kinds of things that have already been decided on by the community, actually implementing them, which helps solve both of these issues around access to data under law and access to data that still allows you to protect your systems while providing legitimate access for legitimate purposes, unencumbered by any other kinds of constraints only the constraints of what you're allowed to do by policy.
Right. So following on from that, what do you think are some of the, like how is SAC101 relevant to the forthcoming GNSO ePDP on the temporary specification?
It's quite relevant in several areas, and in fact, SSAC communicated with the GNSO just the day before yesterday to make them aware of, make sure they were aware of the recommendations that we actually pointed out would be applicable within that ePDP process. And some of the primary ones are defining the purposes of who is. And this is something that's been sitting for a very long time, which needs to be done, and it's actually required in order to provide access to data. And also the points around the purposes for law enforcement and security practitioners as a legitimate use to protect the security and stability of the system, and of course the overall user base of the internet. Extremely important for that, and for solving problems, et cetera. And also that the access should be granted via some sort of a accredited gated model, as already has been proposed through a framework that has been put out by ICANN.org, and that such access be done on a per policy and not per some other artificial restrictions.
So what are some of the issues that that SAC101 points out with the current temporary specification?
Right. So what we've seen with the current temp spec is that there is it's a very high level when it comes to describing current access. Well, it says that registrars must provide access to people with legitimate purposes who can petition for data that's currently being redacted. What we've seen in practice is that leaves a wide latitude for how that response is done. Little is known about how to actually make those requests. In fact, many people don't even know that they can make the request because this is so new and it hasn't really been publicized. And there hasn't been anything put in place to have some consistent messaging around how to do this, how to go about actually requesting the information, what the requirements are on the contracted parties to actually give the data, so they're in the dark as to what actually they have to do. So they're left to their own recognizance, which I understand from a legal perspective, but from a consistency and all those things that we want to see in the security space and being able to get answers, it makes it very difficult. And then further, the way that it was written up has allowed people to redact data that isn't really covered by GDPR. So we're seeing a lot of registration data for non-EU entities being blocked at various registries and registrars. So that makes it very difficult and inconsistent to find out data about various activities that you would normally do.
Sure. Thank you, Rod. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, we look forward to working with the ICANN community and further understanding what we're trying to do and help work our way through this whole thing together.